I sent those photos to a stranger, and now everyone in my life thinks I'm some kind of digital exhibitionist who gets off on throwing her marriage away. They don't understand that the man who changed our locks while I was finishing a shift at the hospital wasn't just betrayed. He was protecting himself from a threat he couldn't identify. The truth sits like a stone in my throat, because admitting what really happened means I'll have to say the words I've been choking on for 3 months. I paid someone $15,000 to keep those images private, and he still found them anyway. By the time you hear why I sent them in the first place, you'll realize the worst part isn't the nudity or the locks. It's that I was the one who taught a predator how to hunt me. 7 months ago, I started sleeping in our guest bedroom because Mark's snoring had gotten so violent it was shaking the walls. That's the official story I told our couple's therapist anyway. The real reason was that my husband's body had started feeling like a piece of furniture in our queen bed, necessary for the room's composition, but completely invisible when you actually lived in the space. He'd been working 80-hour weeks at the architecture firm since his partner Dave came on board, and somewhere between the midnight conferences and the weekend site visits, Mark had replaced our entire vocabulary with grunts and abbreviated text messages. I downloaded WhisperChat on a Tuesday night after he fell asleep on the couch again, his phone still clutched in his hand like a security blanket. The app promised anonymity, connection, nothing more dangerous than words on a screen. My username was EveningNurse31, and my profile picture was a shadowy silhouette of a woman looking out a window. Just looking for someone to talk to after long shifts, I'd typed, adding how pathetic the words looked on screen and posting them anyway. The first message from Alex 1985 arrived 40 minutes later. He asked about my worst patient of the week, told me about his impossible deadline, and used complete sentences with punctuation. By midnight, I was laughing at my phone screen for the first time in years. When he mentioned that his business partner was driving him insane, I felt the click of recognition without understanding why it mattered. We talked every night for a week, and on the 8th night, he asked if he could see my face. I sent a photo of myself in scrubs, head tilted, smile carefully calibrated to look friendly but not flirty. The rush of validation when he responded, "You're stunning," landed like a drug I'd been mainlining without knowing I was addicted. That's when I should have deleted the app. Instead, I turned off notifications so Mark wouldn't see them pop up on our shared iPad, which seemed like a perfectly reasonable precaution at the time. 3 weeks into our nightly chats, Alex started asking if I had photos that showed more personality. That's what he called them, personality shots. I'd had 2 glasses of wine, and just finished a shift where 3 different patients had mistaken me for someone much younger, much prettier, someone worthy of being hit on by men who weren't my husband. I stood in our bathroom mirror and took 3 photos, each one progressively more revealing, until I was sending him an image of myself from the neck down, wrapped only in the towel I'd just dried off with. My heart hammered against my ribs as I hit send, a symphony of guilt and power I'd never felt before. Mark was asleep in the next room, his back to me like always, and I told myself this was just digital flirting, a victimless crime in a starving marriage. The photo disappeared after 10 seconds, which meant it had never really existed at all. I was so focused on the immediate thrill that I missed the way Alex's questions had started shifting, more specific, more calculated, asking about my husband's schedule, our address, if we had security cameras. Dave's wife cornered me in the hospital cafeteria during my lunch break, her voice dripping with suburban warmth that didn't reach her eyes. "I hear you've been a real comfort to my husband during his stressful negotiations," she said, stirring her tea so slowly I could hear the spoon scraping the ceramic. The bottom fell out of my stomach. She knew. I couldn't breathe as she pulled out her phone and showed me a screenshot, my towel photo, the one that was supposed to disappear, now saved to Dave's camera roll with my real name scrawled underneath in his notes app. "He likes to keep records," she whispered, and I tasted bile in the back of my throat. But here's what I did next. The thing that makes me more than just a fool. I transferred $5,000 from our joint savings into Dave's personal account. I told myself it was to protect Mark from finding out, to buy Dave's silence, to make this nightmare go away. I'd convinced myself I was being noble, sacrificing money to preserve my husband's feelings. The receipt came through on my phone at exactly 3:47 p.m., and I deleted it before Mark could see the notification. Mark didn't notice the missing money for 6 days. When he did, he called me between meetings, his voice tight with that professional calm he used with difficult clients. Honey, did you authorize a transfer last week? I was standing in the grocery store, holding a carton of eggs, and the lie came out so smoothly it surprised even me. Mom needed help with her roof. Emergency repair. I meant to tell you. The silence stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. Then your mom's roof was replaced 2 years ago. I paid for it. I laughed, too high and too fast. Different section, storm damage. I could hear him typing in the background, probably pulling up weather reports, probably calculating how many lies I'd told before. We'll talk tonight, he said, and the line went dead. I abandoned my cart in the dairy aisle and drove home, my hands shaking so badly I could barely steer. That was the first time I realized the locks on our doors weren't just physical barriers. They were symbols of trust I'd been systematically dismantling. By the time I got home, Mark had already left for a site visit, but he'd been there. The wedding photo from our mantel, the one where we're laughing at something the photographer said, was face down on the coffee table. Our shared calendar had a new entry for Saturday, Dave dinner, discuss partnership dissolution. I stared at those words until they blurred. He knew, he had to know. Why else would he be ending his business partnership? I texted Alex, Dave, begging him to tell me what he'd said to Mark. The response came immediately, meet me at the Hilton bar. Room 412. We need to discuss our arrangement. I should have blocked him. I should have confessed everything to Mark and let the marriage implode on its own timeline. Instead, I drove to that hotel, reasoning that if I could just explain, if I could just make Dave understand that I'd done this out of loneliness, not malice, maybe he'd give me back the photos and disappear. The bartender recognized me from the Christmas party Mark's firm threw last year, called me by name as I ordered a vodka soda. I didn't see Dave slip a USB drive into my purse when he hugged me goodbye, but I found it later, plugged into my laptop, containing every photo I'd ever sent him plus a video of our meeting that made it look like I was initiating an affair. The next morning, Mark was already awake when my alarm went off, sitting in the chair across from our bed, fully dressed, his phone screen glowing in the semi-darkness. I found the photos, he said, his voice flat as a lake at dawn. Dave's wife sent them to me last night. She's filing for divorce, wanted me to know my wife was the other woman. I sat up, the word no stuck in my throat because it wasn't true. I'd never touched Dave, never wanted to, never even considered it. But the photos were real, and the money was real, and the hotel meeting was real. I can explain, I whispered, but he held up a hand. Don't, just don't. He stood and walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. I'm going to work. When I come back, I want you gone. He didn't yell, he didn't cry. That professional calm was worse than any explosion could have been. I called in sick to the hospital and spent the day packing, crying so hard I threw up twice, unable to process how a handful of photos had erased 7 years of marriage. I was shoving clothes into a suitcase when our neighbor, Mrs. Chen, knocked on the door. She held up her phone, showing me a text from Mark, please keep an eye on the house today. Changing locks this afternoon, don't let anyone in. The world tilted sideways. He was changing the locks while I was still inside, still his wife, still the woman who'd made his coffee that morning. Mrs. Chen's eyes were full of pity I couldn't stand to see. He said to tell you your things will be left in the garage. I nodded numb and closed the door on her concerned face. My phone buzzed with a message from Dave, he knows about the money too, said he's calling the police unless you return it. Transfer it back by 5 p.m. or I sent him the video from the bar. I was trapped between two men who saw me as a thief and a whore, and the worst part was I couldn't decide which label fit better. I transferred the money back, watching our savings account drain to nearly nothing, then sat on the floor of our bedroom and waited for the sound of the locksmith's truck. Mark came home at 4:30, accompanied by a man with a metal toolbox. He didn't look at me as I carried my suitcase to the car, didn't react when Mrs. Chen tried to hand him a casserole with a note card on top. The locksmith worked efficiently, replacing each deadbolt while I sat in my Honda and watched my home become a building I no longer had permission to enter. My phone showed 6 missed calls from my mother, 3 from Sarah, and a voicemail from the hospital's HR department. I listened to that one first. Claire, we need to discuss your online conduct. A patient's family member has filed a complaint. The bottom dropped out again. Dave must have sent the photos to someone at the hospital, maybe as revenge for pulling the money back, maybe just because he could. I drove to Sarah's apartment with 1 suitcase and a phone full of evidence of my own destruction, wondering when exactly I'd become someone who needed to be locked out of her own life. Sarah opened her door and saw my face, then pulled me into a hug without asking questions. I spent the first 3 days at her place in a fog of tears and vodka, checking my phone every 10 minutes for a message from Mark that never came. On the fourth day, I got a certified letter from his attorney, addressed to me at Sarah's address. He'd found me that fast. Inside was a petition for divorce citing adultery and financial misconduct, plus a copy of a restraining order preventing me from contacting Mark or coming within 500 feet of our house. The evidence packet included the photos, bank statements, and a sworn affidavit from Dave claiming I'd initiated a sexual relationship and attempted to extort money from him. My signature was on the bank transfers. My face was in the photos. My lies were documented in text messages Mark had somehow recovered. I had no ground to stand on, no defense that wouldn't sound like a soap opera villain's monologue. Sarah read the papers and asked quietly, "Is any of this what actually happened?" I opened my mouth to tell her the truth, the whole truth, but the words got stuck again. I told her I'd been lonely, that Mark had been distant, that I'd sought comfort from a stranger and gotten trapped. I left out the money, the hotel, the way I'd met Dave in person twice before Mark ever found out. I left out the pregnancy test I'd taken that morning, the one showing 2 pink lines I'd been planning to surprise Mark with before everything exploded. Sarah believed the version I gave her because she wanted to believe I was a victim, not a volunteer in my own destruction. She helped me draft a response to the hospital, claiming the photos were stolen from my phone, that I was the victim of a hacking. It was technically true. Dave had stolen them from the app, even if I'd been the one to send them. The lie by omission tasted metallic on my tongue, but I was so deep in deception by then that adding another layer felt like putting on a coat in winter. Necessary, even if it was heavy. What I didn't realize was that Mark had hired a private investigator, and that investigator was already compiling a timeline that would make my half-truths look like war crimes. The Pies report arrived with the final divorce papers, a bound document I'd have admired for its thoroughness if it hadn't been the blueprint of my annihilation. It included photos of me at the Hilton bar, time-stamped and circled in red. It had screenshots of the whisper chat messages, ones I'd deleted from my phone but lived forever on the app's servers. It had my bank records, my text messages to Dave, even a statement from the bartender remembering how I'd seemed intimate with the man I was meeting. Mark had annotated the margins in his precise architect's handwriting, lies about her mother, lies about work, lies about everything. The last page was a photo of me leaving our house with my suitcase, my face blurred by tears, taken from across the street by someone who'd been watching me long enough to know I was leaving for good. The investigator had unearthed something else too, something I thought I'd buried deeper than the money evidence of a second meeting at the Hilton, 3 weeks before I claimed Dave had started blackmailing me. Mark had highlighted that date and written, "Our anniversary." She said she was working a double shift. The pregnancy complicated everything, especially since I'd been too scared to get a paternity test. The baby could be Mark's, probably was, statistically speaking, but the dates overlapped just enough that I'd convinced myself I couldn't know for sure. I'd continued sending Dave photos even after that anniversary night, after we'd slept together in that hotel room. The blackmail story was true, but it was true because I'd given him ammunition willingly, enthusiastically, before I realized who he was. I'd become the other woman in my own marriage, then tried to buy my way back to innocence with money that was half Mark's. Dave's wife called me 3 days after I received the pie report, her voice broken in a way that made my own pain seem small. "He does this," she said. "Finds lonely women, gets them to trust him, uses them. I thought you were different. I thought you were the one he was leaving me for." The laugh that came out of me then was hollow enough to echo. I'd destroyed my marriage over a man who saw me as interchangeable, and I'd been so starved for attention that I'd let him. I lost my job at the hospital, not because of the photos, but because Dave's wife had a cousin on the board, and suddenly my performance reviews from the past 5 years were being questioned. I lost Sarah when she found the positive pregnancy test in my purse, and realized I'd been lying about how far along I was, which meant the timeline I'd given her was another fiction. I lost my mother when she answered a call from Mark, who decided she deserved to know why her daughter wouldn't be welcome at family Christmas. Piece by piece, the infrastructure of my life was dismantled until I was living in a studio apartment paid for with the last of my savings, 7 months pregnant, and checking the mail every day for some new piece of paper documenting my failures. Mark had changed the locks on a Monday afternoon. but the truth was he'd locked me out of our life long before that. I'd just been too busy performing the role of devoted wife to notice he'd stopped coming home in any meaningful way. The stranger I'd sent nudes to had found them, because I'd handed him the keys to my insecurity, and he'd used them to unlock every door I'd tried to keep closed. I started this confession because yesterday I saw a post on Reddit, a woman asking if she was wrong for wanting to keep her pregnancy after her husband left her for sending photos to a stranger. 3,000 comments calling her a cheater, a liar, trash. I wanted to write my own reply, to tell her it gets better, that people forgive, that the locks can be changed back. But I couldn't lie to her the way I've been lying to everyone else. The locks Mark installed that afternoon are still there. I've driven past the house twice, each time telling myself I'm going somewhere else, but my car knows the route. Once I saw a woman through the kitchen window, laughing at something Mark was saying, her face relaxed in a way mine hasn't been in years. He's not waiting for me to come back. He's not wondering if the baby is his. He's moved on, and I'm still standing in the hallway of that Monday afternoon, keys in hand, waiting for a door to open that never will. My due date is in 6 weeks. I've decided not to find out paternity until the baby arrives, because some part of me still believes that holding on to that uncertainty is the only thing connecting me to the life I threw away. Mark's lawyer sent one final letter, offering to pay for the paternity test and cover medical expenses if I agree to terminate parental rights should the child be his. I've read that letter 47 times, looking for some crack in the formal language where I might find the man who used to bring me coffee in bed on Sundays. It's not there. What is there is a businessman protecting his assets, a man who learned the hard way that some locks can't be changed once they're broken. I sent nudes to a stranger because I wanted to feel seen. He found them because I was careless with my own loneliness. Mark changed the locks because, in the end, I was the stranger in our marriage all along.